to 5.
All right, tonight is Wednesday, November 17th. It's a Fantasy Finish Line podcast. Tonight we're talking about Week 11 in the NFL. We're going to preview some deviation from the ECR and the audio Statistically Insignificant Special Edition is tonight.
That's a nonsensically long name for a show.
It was an absurdly long title. I could use a little editing. Oh, look at that. All right, this is the Fantasy Finish Line podcast. I am Jason, joined as always by Dave. Over to my right, your left. Anyways, tonight we are drinking some beers from the Peach State.
Yes.
That we purchased in the Peach State. We were down there for the weekend. It was a good time.
And pretty good. One of the people that we are in a league with, Glenn, just got married this past weekend.
I'm in 3 leagues with him.
And we celebrated his marriage with him, his new wife, and mountains and whiskey.
Yeah. We celebrated all of those things. It was fantastic. It was a really good time. Happy to see everybody from Drink 5 and elsewhere down at the show, at the wedding.
I like the people from elsewhere.
Well, I know it's more people, but, that's fine. Anyways, what are you drinking over there, Dave? You have one of the Sweetwaters.
I'm taking a picture from one of our photographers at the moment.
Yeah, people on YouTube will see it. It doesn't come out weird at all. Cheers.
I don't understand what you're saying.
I don't know.
But yes, I am having a fresh, double dry hopped, hazy and juicy Sweetwater Brewing Hazy IPA. Now, I've been to Sweetwater Brewing because I go down there for business every other year in August and occasionally in the fall. And I like their what do you call it? Like the dank IPA.
Okay.
They have a couple different ones that are. But the hazy, juicy IPAs are getting super popular now everywhere, and I often like to drink those when we're doing a beer tasting that's earlier in the day or even in the afternoon.
Sure.
Because they taste like orange juice beer, like very tasty.
Yes, good point. I have the Sweetwater 420 Imperial IPA. So it is 9% alcohol. I will probably just have the one this evening, but we've got a shot as well. Which I was looking around for earlier, and then I located.
Well, that's good.
It was quite the revelation.
As Jason said, we're going to be talking about his statistically insignificant column, which is not always related directly to fantasy points, but every time that we talk about it, whether it's online or offline, it always relates to and interrelates with fantasy-related items.
I try to.
So
I get close.
So yeah, I'm excited to hear what you have going, and of course, this is all about things that happened this previous week, last Thursday to the Monday night game.
Week 10, yes, Week 10. So kicking it off, the best player of the week is a great place to start. This is one of my favorite guys to write about in the last couple of years. Patrick Mahomes. He had 36.24 fantasy points this year. That's his highest fantasy total in over a year. Last time he had that was Week 8 of last season. So the Chiefs offense got back on track. They put up 41 points, and they played the Raiders, and it's a team that Patrick Mahomes loves to play. So this is the first of 2 games, obviously, against the Raiders this year because they're in the same division. The Raiders are the team that he has the absolute best stats against. Already going into this game, he had the most career passing yards and passing touchdowns against the Raiders over any other team in the league. And he just made it way better. It's like he has more than 450 yards more than the next team, like 20 touchdowns in his career against the Raiders versus, I think, 12 for the next highest number against the team. So very impressive by this guy. And then this was another cool stat about this. It was his 3rd game with 400-plus yards and 5-plus touchdowns. That ties the league lead all time And the three guys who have also done that, Dan Marino, Peyton Manning, and Joe Montana.
So basically, he always beats up the Raiders, but because of his poor performances in the last couple of matches, a lot of fantasy team managers were actually sitting him for this match, which, as it turns out, was the incorrect thing to do this particular week.
Yeah, we actually had a question last week asking us if they should sit Patrick Mahomes, and we said no. Keep him in your lineup.
Yeah, the answer is no.
So I'm very happy that back in hindsight, that we don't have to sit on the other side of that.
And if someone was to ask that question and they have multiple top-tier quarterbacks, the other question would be, why do you have so many top-tier quarterbacks? And what do your running backs and wide receivers look like?
Right.
Because there's no reason for you to have 3 top 10 quarterbacks to even have to make that decision. I could see there being someone asking between one of the quarterbacks that have really risen over the course of the year and another, but rostering more than 2 quarterbacks in a 1-quarterback league is a decision that losers make, Jason.
I would agree with you, Dave.
Yeah.
So we saw 8 players with at least 20 carries this past week. And this is something that we've picked up on before where generally either wide receivers or running backs are dominant in the first half of the year, and then the other group sort of picks up the slack in the second half of the year.
Uh-huh.
And generally I think it's wide receivers are dominant early and running backs are dominant late.
Yeah, because the units take a little while to become cohesive to that offensive line to make the right kinds of holes, etc.
Yeah, I think it's more complicated for an offensive line to have a positive running game over a long period of time, and I also think it's more complicated for the defensive backs to stop the wide receivers. So once both groups can kind of catch up, the balance shifts.
So this is when we talk about running backs injured in the second half of the season, which we have been seeing and are seeing right now, and picking up those players to fill in from the running back position on offenses that have good offensive lines. And there are a couple guys that we'll probably mention tonight that fall under those categories as well. Could give you the victory in a lot of different ways. And you have those guys that if you were to pick them up because of someone who is out for 3 weeks, 4 weeks, or the rest of the season, could then drive you to the championship. Like Derrick Henry being out opens up all kinds of roads. Alvin Kamara is out and still not practicing, and that's a problem for Alvin Kamara owners. Now Aaron Jones is out with a sprained MCL, and that's going to be an issue for Aaron Jones owners.
It's going to be a couple weeks there too.
But instead of looking at it from the pessimistic point of view, I prefer to say, who can we extract, some good fantasy production from and put them on our team?
And sometimes you wind up with, a net positive on a team where 2 players are splitting carries, one of them goes down and the other one becomes a more dominant running back.
And we still have trades open, so by all means, you have 3-4 players on your team that are doing well too. You should absolutely trade those running backs to have high values now, because the tea leaves do not have fully healthy running backs over the course of a year usually. That doesn't usually happen.
It's very rare. It really is.
Right now there's Jonathan Taylor, but what are the odds that Jonathan Taylor is healthy the whole season? Probably 1 in 2.
Don't curse my boy.
Hey, man. They said the same thing about Derrick Henry before he was gone for the season. Happens every year.
Yeah. But, of the guys who were over 20 carries or at 20 carries or better, Ramandra Stevenson, Antonio Gibson are guys who are examples of people who are splitting carries, and A.J. Dillon, of course, splitting carries because of an injury ahead of them. They are now, getting a huge opportunity.
Yeah.
So those are all players to look at going forward. I always kind of check in with the defenses. So there were 9 defense and special teams with 10-plus points this week. And as we saw, it was a struggle for the offenses this week. There were only 2 quarterbacks who had 3 or more touchdowns, and there were only 2 quarterbacks who had 300 or more passing yards. And Patrick Mahomes covered both of those. So if he hadn't played, it would have been a really sad week for offensives. For offenses. So, Dave, when you look at defenses and your fantasy teams, do you try to ride with one for multiple weeks? Do you pick them up for their matchups several weeks down the line, or are you strictly like a week-by-week streaming guy?
I like to stick with the team for stretches if possible. I have like the Saints so far this year. They put up a lot of really quality games, even though they themselves as an offense have not really done the same. It looks like a strong one right now that a lot of people are interested in is Miami, for example. They have a couple games before their bye week, I believe, which is in a couple weeks from then, that are strong for them. I like to look at it on a week-by-week basis, and I don't normally pick up any defenses to sit on the bench and wait until that next week, until we get to the fantasy playoffs. Then I think it's a little bit more important to have the skill players, including defense and kicker, if you have those included in your league, that are going to have the best matchups now rather than worrying about whoever's on your bench. And so then you can start dumping bench players that are maybe not as important to allow you to carry another defense for week 15 or week 16.
Yeah.
And that's what I do. But I don't generally trade out defenses every week. I try to find a combination of defenses that will be able to take me through a couple weeks at a time.
I think that's the right approach.
I also think that there's a lot of variability there, but if you have a defense that is putting up good points, that is forcing turnovers, or that is getting sacks, they're not likely to just suddenly become horrible when they face a tougher opponent. They're still probably going to put up some kind of baseline points for you.
Yeah, absolutely. So we had 33 carries this year was the second highest total that we've seen on anyone this whole season. That was Deandre Swift with 33 carries for the Lions this week. He is the person with the most amount of carries who's not named Derrick Henry. Henry had games of 33 and 35 carries this year.
Yeah, wow.
But all we're left with is Deandre Swift at this point. So it's interesting that this doubles his career high mark. So he had 33 this week. His previous career high was 16, also in week 10, but of last year. He had 130 rushing yards, another career high for him. He's on pace for almost 800 rushing yards, which would be the most for the Lions since Joik Bell in 2014. Last time they had a 1,000-yard rusher was Reggie Bush in 2013, and he barely made it. He had 1,006 yards. I don't know if you remember, but there was like some confusion in those last couple of plays with him, whether or not he was going to actually get it. 1,006, he got it soundly in the end, but there was a lot of question as to whether or not they would get a 1,000-yard rusher.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just really been downhill for the Lions. So they did have Barry Sanders in the 90s, who put up 10 straight years of 100-yard seasons, and I guess they're regressing to the mean at this point.
Yeah, I like DeAndre Swift, and I didn't pick him up in my leagues because of Detroit, but it turns out that he's been a fairly decent and productive running back this year. It's just dangerous every time that you play a Lions player. You have to hold your breath during the whole game.
Yep. So he still is only the let's see, 3, 6, 9, 11th best running back this year.
That's pretty good.
I mean, it's pretty good. Yeah.
Yeah.
But if you're going to be getting 33 carries, you would expect to be a top 5 guy.
Yeah, well, we're getting what we can.
I think it was a lot of game script that wound up netting him such a huge number, considering he's never been over 20 at any point in his career.
Mm-hmm.
And the last thing, so this was an interesting thing I noticed. The perfect quarterback rating, 158.3. I won't get into how they come up with that number because, frankly, I have no idea. But I know that to have a perfect quarterback rating, you have to throw a few passes, you have to score a touchdown, that sort of thing. So we had 2 backup quarterbacks that played on Sunday. Both had perfect passer ratings. They both threw 3 passes for a touchdown. So Brian Hoyer actually led a 95-yard drive. He went 3 for 3 with 85 yards and a touchdown. I don't think that we're going to see Brian Hoyer much this year, although maybe the Patriots find themselves in garbage time again.
Hoyer the Destroyer.
Hoyer the Destroyer. You got it, Dave. And then Joe Flacco played for the Jets, and I guess Mike White's not going to be playing anymore. 4 interceptions sort of takes the shine off of that good game he had a couple weeks ago.
Well, neither of those guys are the starter. They're all just fill-in players.
That's true.
That have not quite lived up to expectations. So, Yeah, I wouldn't call any one of them the starter. I think they'll just go back to their guy when they can, which is Zach Wilson, right?
Yeah, I'm sure when Zach Wilson is healthy, he'll probably get a shot at playing because, Joe Flacco's not going to take this job from anybody, and Mike White apparently isn't either.
No, the guys showing out in the Jets have been Michael Carter and Elijah Moore. Everybody else has not been performing to the level that we would expect them to, or hope that they can perform to.
So the actual best starting quarterback this week, Mac Jones, had a 142.1 rating. The Patriots won their fourth game in a row. They're 6-4. They're the 6th seed in the playoffs. So it looks like Jones has been the best rookie quarterback so far this year, but not in fantasy football, just in regular football. He's only got one game over 20 points. Not really worth it in fantasy. Only has value in Superflex leagues at this point. But, hey, Mac Jones playing really well, handing the ball off, controlling the game, doing exactly what Bill Belichick wants him to do in order to win.
Yeah.
And that's how you remain a quarterback in this league. All right, so make sure every week to check out my column. It's called Statistically Insignificant. Normally it's out on Mondays, pending my travel arrangements. And, we'll post it. We'll sometimes get into it. You can talk to me on Twitter about it, whatever you want. But if you have any ideas about it, then be sure to let us know. If you find a cool stat while you're watching on Sunday, I'm always looking for those. You can email us, jason@drink5 or dave@drink5.com. You can tweet us, hit us up on Instagram. It's easy to find us anywhere you want to go. We're just Drink5, pretty much all places. So let's have a quick drink, maybe?
Okay, sure.
And then we'll get to some of the ECR deviations. Another needlessly long title. Cheers.
Rankings works.
Rankings, okay. We'll discuss the rankings, but not just list them.
Cheers. Cheers. And before we get into all of that, let me say quickly, for those of you listening and watching on YouTube, please do subscribe to the channel. We would greatly appreciate it. It will allow us to keep on doing this season after season. And for those of you listening on a podcast network or Apple Podcasts or Google Music or Stitcher or Spotify or wherever you listen to podcasts, please do subscribe there as well, and you'll be able to listen to our podcasts as they come out. You'll get a notification saying that there's a new one available. We appreciate any and all engagement that you can give us on our social channels, which all have Drink5 in the name, surprisingly enough.
Yeah.
Or email jason@drink5.com or dave@drink5.com with your individual
Those have Drink5 in the name too.
And specific questions. But yeah, just interact with us. We are available and happy to help you with those Sunday morning or Saturday night or Thursday night or Monday afternoon lineup questions.
Yeah, indeed. They're always fun to field those questions, see how other people are kind of managing their teams. So every week, Dave posts his rankings. He updates them throughout the week. It's a lot of work. We're all appreciative of the work you put into those rankings, Dave. You are listed as a Fantasy Pro expert. So if you go to Fantasy Pros and you search maybe like should I start this guy or this guy, Dave's opinion is going to be listed under,
It's funny that Jason says he's listed as one. Not you are a Fantasy Pros expert, but listed as one. You're listed as, in quotation marks, a fantasy. We've been doing this for years. And yes.
It's the power that they invest in you.
Absolutely. Absolutely have been an expert for quite a while now. In fact, multiple times this year, Drink5 rankings have been in the top 10, including this past week. For week 10, we are number 7 out of all 200 or so Fantasy Pro experts.
Oh yeah, Dave.
So
that's awesome.
It pays to tune in and listen to our long researched analysis and prognostications. Of course, we can get things wrong, but we find that the experts, myself included, generally get things more correct or more accurate than your lay person playing fantasy, which is why there's an industry here at all.
Yeah, well put. So every week, Dave's going to post his player rankings on our website. It's the only place that you can go to actually see just Dave's rankings. If you go to Fantasy Pros, they're always mixed with other experts. And that's just the way Fantasy Pros does it, to sort of keep each person's stuff exclusive. So anyways, what we're going to do is look at Dave's rankings versus the ECR. That's the expert consensus ranking, which is sort of the average of all of the experts to where they think a player should go.
Okay, and I assume you have this in half PPR, right?
This is all half PPR. And what it does is say either we're above or below the ECR, saying we like a player more than everyone else. We don't like a player more than everyone else. And we're gonna say why. So I'm going to bring up each player and give you just a thought about why you might have put it there. You tell me if I'm right or wrong and what you're thinking. Does that work for the player?
Yeah, let's play.
Okay. First guy on our list is Ramandra Stevenson, the running back for New England. His ECR is 21. We got him ranked at 17. That's +4 over the rest of the crowd. So I think that this has a combination of Damian Harris still maybe coming back, maybe not. It is a quick turnaround on Thursday night. So it sounded like he practiced today, and we'll see tomorrow if he's actually going to start or not. But because of his excellent sort of efficiency, and he only played 17 snaps last week and had 12 carries for over 100, or 12 touches for over 100 yards from scrimmage, and then this past week 20 carries, 100 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Things are going well right now. We're riding the hot hand of Ramandra Stevenson, just like Bill Belichick is.
Yeah, you're correct in your assumptions. And like you said, he had 2 touchdowns, 99 rushing yards on 20 carries last week. He also
did they stat correct him? I thought he had 100.
He also had 4.
That's frustrating.
He also had 4 receptions, and not a lot of yardage. But it's good to see him working in the passing game. I think that he has now superseded Brandon Bolden's role in that offense. And it's true that Ramandra Stevenson has been in the doghouse as far as Belichick is concerned earlier in the season. But now it looks like he is actually battling for that starter position with Damian Harris, because he has been consistently more efficient than Harris when both are playing and both are given opportunities. So I love it. I think some people, myself included, last week were hesitant to pick him up in leagues in which he wasn't owned, which admittedly in our group of leagues weren't many, I don't think. But now people have scooped him up everywhere, and they should, because 2 good performances in a row is almost a trend.
Yeah, he's the second most added player on Flea Flicker in the last 3 days, now owned in 63% of leagues. So definitely check that out. So we're talking about efficiency for him. Like I said, last week, week 9, he had 17 snaps on offense and touched the ball 12 times. In week 10, he had 37 snaps on offense, still touched the ball 24 times. So that's an incredible usage rate. He only had 55% of snaps, and that was his high for the season. And so I know that they had some garbage time that he wouldn't have been in anyways, but he's still not even seeing the field nearly as much as he could be.
Yep. So Stevenson, great pickup. If he does it 3 times in a row, and especially with Damian back again, then that's going to mean that he will be a trending player, even with all of the depth chart stuff the way that they were at the beginning of the season, which could hurdle him into an actual starting every week performance role. And absolutely one of those players that we were talking about just before this that could change the trajectory of your fantasy team heading towards the playoffs.
Yeah.
Now, you have to temper expectations just with the fact that he is on the New England Patriots, and that sort of caravan and rotating carousel of running backs will change all the time.
Yes.
But right now, it looks like Ramandre is favored, and you have to go with that, because as long as Belichick favors Ramandre, he's going to get the majority of the carries and touches in that game.
Okay, so we've got Saquon Barkley, the running back for the Giants. His ECR is 16. Dave ranked him down at 20 this week. So that's a -4 from the expert consensus ranking. So he is scheduled to return to the Giants on Sunday. But I think it's going to be a really tough – I'm sorry, not on Sunday, but on Monday. It's going to be a really tough matchup because they go to Tampa to play on Monday night. The Bucs are on a 2-game losing streak. I expect them to play a lot better this week, especially because they have sort of let a few slip through their hands, and now they have what would be termed as a weak opponent right now. So you got to kind of use them to get right. The Bucs are giving up the 8th fewest fantasy points to opposing running backs. So I think that even though he's back, you need to temper expectations. Consider him a flex play. I would be my recommendation.
Yeah, not much to add. Saquon is going to be probably on a pitch count. He was through another fairly concerning injury, and so his rehabilitation coming back is a major concern for the Giants. And he is going up against a team that has traditionally this year been good against running backs, like you mentioned. So,
do you see any continued value for Devonte Booker, or do you think Saquon pretty much eats all that up?
Only in this game, because you would assume that with another week that Saquon would then be able to monopolize all of the touches back into the offense. But I don't think that he necessarily should just be dropped in leagues right now, because Booker could still be getting half of those snaps next week, and he's been fairly good with them. I know I've had Booker on a team where I wasn't expecting much and still got 100 yards.
He's been averaging 14 points a game for the last 5 games since he's been covering for Barkley.
Yeah, so we can expect a dip to that, but he'll probably still have low level flex potential as a running back that will spell Saquon Barkley, or maybe even be a co-featured running back for this particular matchup.
Okay. The only problem I would worry about starting him in this matchup is that the Tampa Bay running defense has been so good this year that maybe it would be one to avoid regardless.
Well, if you're able to avoid it, then
more power to you.
Sometimes
you can't avoid it.
A lot of teams don't have too many options at the moment.
Well, let's see. What are the bye weeks this week? NFL week
14 is just 2. It's the Los Angeles Rams and the Denver Broncos.
That's it. Okay, that's pretty reasonable. That is some running backs, though.
Yeah, there's
for sure.
There's running backs on both sides, a couple wide receivers and a quarterback, and a tight end, 2 tight ends. But it's easier than a lot of the earlier buys have been.
Yes, this isn't bye week hell like it has been.
Oh, the last bye week hell will be in week 14, where we have, I think, 4 teams on bye in what is usually the first week of the fantasy playoffs, but for a lot of fantasy leagues now will be the last week of the regular season.
Yeah, and still, essentially the playoffs for anybody who hasn't quite made it yet. If you need to win to clinch in week 14, it's the playoffs for you.
Yeah, so start looking ahead at that if you don't have such a great position in the standings, because you don't want to end up with 3 buys the week you have to win.
That would be awful.
You're looking right now at your team. You're like,
no, I'm looking up.
I hadn't thought about that.
So week 14, the Colts, the Dolphins, the Patriots, and the Eagles. So definitely some big fantasy names in there. Not a ton, but definitely ones that are, you got your Mike Gesicki, Jonathan Taylor.
There's
Jalen
guys.
Hurts. Yeah.
There's some guys.
Definitely some guys. Daryl Williams, the running back in Kansas City, ECR 23. His rank is 18. We're +5 on him. So he had a fantastic game on Sunday night, along with most of the rest of the Chiefs' offense. 9 catches on 9 targets is the stat line that I like the most from him, to sort of indicate that he may be sticking around through the return of Clyde Edwards-Helaire. Edwards-Helaire has been allowed to come off the IR in the last couple of weeks, and they have chosen not to. There is a chance that he's held off this week, week 11, because the Chiefs have week 12 for a bye. They get Thanksgiving off. How nice for them. So I think that you can be very confident in firing up Daryl Williams this week. I think he's a solid RB2. I think he has a lot of upside, especially in any sort of half or full PPR league, because of the possibility of getting lots of catches.
Well, last week's game isn't going to happen every week. In fact, the Chiefs may even slump again after what was such a crazy uptick of last week's offense. However, I tend to agree, and that's why I have him ranked higher than most of the other experts out there this particular week. I don't know if Clyde Edwards-Helaire will come back, especially not in his full health. And even if he was to come back, I agree with what you said early in the snippet that you were reading, that Williams still has captured enough momentum to have a role going forward, especially in the passing game. And that's something that the Chiefs have found themselves strangely weak at this year. And so they're going to continue to use those players that they have, and they find work well. So he is still a valuable part of the offense. If we see his role diminish over the next couple weeks, then he'll definitely be a drop candidate on our list.
Yeah.
But for right now, he still is someone that you should have rostered and is probably a high-end RB3 for me, just because of the possibility of Clyde Edwards-Helaire getting a lot of that work.
Fair enough.
But yeah, still a valuable piece.
Yeah, definitely. I think I'll be starting him again this week. So Jamar Chase, Cincinnati, his ECR is 11. The rank is 5. That's a +6. You're already starting Chase. This isn't about whether or not to start Chase or whether he's on the bubble or anything. I just wanted to point out that he is the WR4 on the year, and ranking him at 11 is too damn low. So Dave has been paying attention. I wonder what everyone else is doing.
The thing to look at is that in week 8 and week 9 versus the Jets and versus Cleveland, his stats weren't that great as compared to the rest of his games. He was the 20-something and 40-something ranked wide receivers in those two games. He just had his bye week. Joe Burrow was also not doing well in the whole offense in general on those two losses that they had after winning against both Detroit and Baltimore. So you could consider that just a team trend that affects the local player performance. It's not yet a player trend because it hasn't been going for 3 days, three weeks, 3 consecutive matches. So I'm going to say that against the Raiders, he picks it back up and is able to get a ton of yards again. But let's keep in mind, and sometimes we tear apart these performances in a little bit more of a granular way and find some players that look like they have done so well over the year, but in reality, most of their fantasy performances that raise their averages come from singular game performances. So for Jamar Chase, for example, he had one game with 159 yards and one game with 201. Every other game has been less than 100. So when we think about Jamar Chase in our head and say he's averaging, 100 yards plus per game, well, that's not really what's happening when you look at the game-by-game perspective.
It's true.
But he is inarguably a top 10 receiver this week, and we expect him, I think both of us do, to bounce back to look like that, along with Joe Burrow against the Raiders next week.
Yeah, I think that the Bengals are going to be looking pretty good. They got beat by the Jets, and I think sort of had a hangover from that when they played Cleveland, and Cleveland did really well against them. But as we know, Cleveland's not that good of a team.
Yeah, and we're not interested in excuses anyway. It doesn't matter why it happened. It only matters, can they turn it around, or is that going to be something that is a sticking point for them? And suddenly the Bengals are just this 500 team because they can't reach the next level at a consistent basis. And I'm not convinced yet. I'm not convinced that the Bengals are amazing. That's a hard thing for you to convince me of, right?
Yeah.
And we've seen Burrow do really well, but we've also seen him suck. And so he needs to be consistent. We do know one thing. If Burrow has a good game, then it generally translates to Jamar Chase having like a 70-yard touchdown. So that's why I rank him above others, is because I think that, as you mentioned, that they should bounce back. I like the bye week in the middle of the season here as a good resting point, and hopefully they do. I'm a fan of another team in the AFC North, but I've always enjoyed the Bengals, and even back when it was Andy Dalton and A.J. Green, which this match, that duo kind of reminds me of. Yeah. It's just nice to see those quarterback wide receiver combos that have really good chemistry, and it seems like they can do no wrong when things are going well.
I think they might be able to kind of go down in Bengals history as better than AJ and Andy.
Well, I'm not willing to discuss that.
They might have the ability to. That's all I'm saying. It's gonna take many years of pitch and catch to take care of that.
This guy's a Bengals fan. I know. I understand.
A new Bengals fan. A bandwagon Bengals fan. So, Devonta Smith, the wide receiver in Philadelphia, his ECR is 23. The rank is 18. That's a +5. So he had his best game of his rookie year last week. He's now got 2 20-point performances in a row, 3 touchdowns in those 2 games, 6 targets in each game. One thing I really like is that he started to bring up his catch percentage. That's now over 61% of the season. That's a number that I was really getting on his case about. His case. It's not like he heard me. Earlier in the season, I found it really disappointing that he was at like 50% or below And so to move it up to 61% over a couple of games is really nice. They get New Orleans. The Eagles, that is, will play New Orleans next week. And New Orleans is giving up the 6th most points to opposing wide receivers. So are you just seeing like a general improvement from Devonta Smith? Is that why you want to move him up? Or do you like something about the matchup specifically?
Well, we officially have a player that is trending up in Devonta Smith, which I love. And that's true with his targets and with his points that he's had basically over the past 3 games. And so he's moved from 2 to 20 to 20.6. Now that's a rough kind of a trend. I'd like to see one more game where he's still up there getting like 15, 16 points.
Yeah.
But what can we say other than the fact that, like you brought up, over the last 2 games, he's done well, over 41 fantasy points in the last 2 games, and the Saints are 31st against fantasy wide receivers since week 6. So
that's bad.
Earlier in the season, like I mentioned, we were talking about the Saints. I don't know if it was offline or during this podcast, but I love the Saints. They had a good defense in the first 4 or so weeks that I was playing every game.
Yeah.
Now I'm starting to dump them in leagues, but it's because their secondary has been weakened, and they're not performing that well against the wide receivers and running backs any longer. So a good team to go up against. I am not sold at all on the Eagles' offense, on their quarterback. But what does it matter? If a player is trending well, then I have to pay attention to that. And I don't see any indicators that say that he's not going to perform to a high level. And so I have to say Devonta Smith, there's no reason why he shouldn't score 10, 12, 14 fantasy points in this matchup.
Yeah, and Jalen Hurts has 9 turnovers this year. So there's still reason to consider the New Orleans defense this week.
Oh, yeah.
Like you were saying earlier, sometimes the good defenses will play well against good teams anyways.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people
It's not all about matchups.
A lot of people drop squads because they feel like they're going to go up against Buffalo, or they're going to go up against the New England Patriots, or they're going to go up against whatever team that might score a bunch of points against
Have the
them.
New England Patriots already gotten back into the casual mentions of great teams?
Well, teams scoring a lot of points.
Well, yeah, I suppose when you put up 45 last week, that'll help.
So, in order as a defense in most scoring for fantasy leagues, for a defense to score a lot of points, they have to either have defensive touchdowns or a ton of sacks. But as a commissioner, that they're usually losing points when the opposing team scores points against them.
Right.
And so you definitely don't want to play them specifically against teams that are going to score 40 points. So in traditional sense, like the Chiefs and the Bills,
starting from way behind at this point,
not great teams to play against.
Yeah.
But yeah, this year I've seen a lot of instances in which it was actually okay for me to stick a defense, and then they end up getting 14 points or something because of good secondary defensive play. It's not as fickle as kickers, I don't think. I have seen some work done trying to describe or try to figure out how consistent defenses are. But you can normally at least understand, based on what the projected score of the game will be, what the baseline floor of a defense might be.
Okay.
So you don't often know when a team's going to score 25 because that usually involves defensive run backs or whatever. But you can usually tell when a team is going to score 6 or 7 because they're playing against someone who doesn't score a lot of points and who is susceptible through a bad offensive line to sacks.
Yep. So you get a couple more turnovers, and then you have a double-digit game.
Yeah.
So Cole Beasley, the Buffalo wide receiver, his ECR is 32, and his rank is 47. So we're 15 spots lower on him than everybody else. And Beasley's really been trending down the last 3 weeks. It's a proper downward trend, as you maybe don't like to see the downward trends as much, but you like to see that 3 week in a row thing, and that's definitely the case for Beasley. In one of those games, the Bills did only score 6 points, but Beasley had 11 targets in that game. He could only turn it into 33 yards. Last week he was only targeted twice. He had 15 yards. Diggs is getting back on track. He was the number 1 receiver last week. I think that Beasley is going to fall way down the options list for the Bills. And that's sort of what you're looking at here too, right?
Yeah, I'll be short.
Dawson Knox back.
I mean, they have their other pass catchers back. Gabriel Davis showed up. Dawson Knox is coming back and getting healthy. Cole Beasley has a rib injury. Cole Beasley's targets have gone downhill. Stephon Diggs is doing better.
Don't forget about the mighty Matt Breida.
All the things you said. So there's not a lot here to dig into other than not performing well, not getting a lot of targets. He was relied upon in two different segments of the year, the week 8 and week 9, and then also back earlier in the like week 1 through 3.
Yeah.
And that's great, but he's always going to be that inconsistent kind of guy because his usage depends on the health and value of the other pass catchers in the offense.
That's very true. And one of the things I brought up in a past week about the Bills is that the way that defenses were playing them, they were sort of forcing all the passes to go underneath. And that's what really benefited Cole Beasley.
Yeah.
It looks like, at least this past week, that the Bills have sort of righted the ship, if you will, in terms of their offense, just like the Chiefs did. So if they're able to get that down the field game going again, Cole Beasley is going to be less relevant. Darnell Mooney, the Chicago wide receiver, his ECR is 41. You got him ranked all the way up at 33. That's a +8 for him. So what happened? The Bears went on bye and everyone forgot about them, which is understandable because they're a very forgettable team right now. So in week 9, Mooney had the best fantasy game that he's had as a pro, scoring twice. Justin Fields had his best game as a pro. The Ravens' pass defense the last 2 weeks has not been what it was to start the season.
Yeah.
So the Bears play the Ravens this week. That leaves Mooney, in my opinion, and I believe yours, as a wide receiver 3 flex option, probably more in the flex category, but definitely someone who has a decently high ceiling. If he can put up a couple touchdowns, that's great.
I wasn't too interested in Mooney earlier for a couple of reasons. One being that it still seemed like there was just this balance beam thing going on with all the pass catchers on that team, at least from week 1 through 8 or so. So you had Cole Kmet and Allen Robinson that were also catching passes inconsistently. One or the other might have more on one particular game versus the other game. But like you said, all I really care about is how is the offense trending and what do the targets look like and are the people healthy, right? So for Mooney, he has only once during this entire season seen less than 5 targets. And that is consistency.
That's nice.
But what I didn't like about Mooney earlier in the season was the inconsistency at which Fields in general was playing the quarterback position. And it looks like Fields has been a little bit better. I'm still very wary and hesitant to play any Bears players that are not named David Montgomery after he gets healthy.
Yeah.
Because he's been very good.
I think he's back. Like not just back on the team and playing, but he's back.
Sure. Well, I hope so for the Bears' sake. You need that kind of a consistent running back to help out the rest of the offense.
Yeah.
But I think that because we're seeing Justin Fields do a little better and we look at the consistency of targets to Mooney, that means, like you said, that Mooney is going to be a consistent WR3 or flex spot for most league scoring settings. And he is someone to now pick up or acquire before the trade deadline for all teams. Someone like a Cole Beasley that before was more consistent. Mooney is better or on the same scale as that. So a lot of guys that people are saying you should dump, looking at Jacoby Myers, looking at Cole Beasley, looking at some of the other wide receivers that we'll talk about in our cut list later in the show.
Yeah.
Picking up a guy or trading and acquiring a guy like Darnell Mooney is not a bad idea at all. Some other people that I might put on that kind of a list are guys like Hunter Renfro and players that are so consistent that don't have a high ceiling necessarily, but they also have a very high floor of targets per game.
Okay. We got Kendrick Bourne, the New England wide receiver. His ECR is 45. His rank is 38. That's a +7 on Bourne. So he led the Patriots in receiving yards. He found the end zone for the 4th time this past week. He's now got at least 68 yards and a touchdown in 4 of his last 8 games. The Falcons, they play the Falcons this week. The Falcons are giving up the 8th most points to opposing wide receivers. And Bourne is only owned, just a side note, he's only owned in 38% of flea flicker leagues. So he's probably available in your league if you need any kind of help during a bye week. Remember, there's still several. I think we've got 11 and 12. I don't think there's any buys in week 13. and then you got week 14.
I'm very confused about Kendrick Bourne. I think that he'll do well against I believe he plays against the Atlanta Falcons this week.
Yeah, the Falcons.
But the problem with him is that he doesn't get enough targets per game. He's only getting like 3 or 4 targets per game.
He's not consistent enough.
And so that means that he's one of those guys that you're going to be wanting to acquire on your squad and being like, well, look, I mean, he's been averaging 11.7 fantasy points per game since week 6, and that's great. But if he only gets 35 yards on 3 passes in a game, then you're going to hate that you acquired him and started him in your roster. And so he's still too inconsistent as far as targets in the New England offense to really start on an every game basis. I just feel like he matches up really well against Atlanta's almost non-existent secondary. And I think that they'll be throwing the ball as demonstrated this past week with Mac Jones, to Kendrick Bourne, and the running backs and Hunter Henry. And so I like him as a this week play, but I would not suggest that you pick up and play Kendrick Bourne on an every week basis, and I would not suggest that you acquire him from somebody. I would suggest that you sell him if you can to people.
Sure.
Maybe even after this game, if he does get more than his average of 11.4, if he gets like a touchdown and 4 receptions, like maybe you could sell him for something that's more consistent.
Yeah, and just to correct myself from earlier, there are buys in week 13. The Panthers, the Browns, the Packers, and the Titans.
Well, shit.
So definitely some fantasy relevant players. And to round out the bye weeks, week 12 next week, the Chiefs and the Cardinals are on bye. Only 2 teams, but that's a lot of fantasy players that are going to be out. So definitely you need to sort of plan now for the bye weeks for the rest of the year. If you're in contention, that's great. You need to make a plan. Mm-hmm. If you're way ahead of the game, if you're 10-0, 9-1 at this point, you probably don't need to necessarily worry too much about bye weeks. You wouldn't need to drop players you wouldn't otherwise drop in order to cover the bye weeks. But if you're right in the middle there, you definitely need to worry about that. Set your lineups in a way, get your roster built in a way so that you are ready to go for the bye week and you're not surprised when you go to set your lineup on Tuesday.
Yeah, it has a lot to do with exactly what you're saying.
All right, let's have a drink. I hope you at home or wherever you are have the ability to get a drink as well. Cheers.
The ability to get a drink.
If you're listening in the car, just have some water. When you get home, have a beer.
Or if you're disabled, just yell at someone else to get a drink for you, or train a dog to get a drink for you, or, whatever you need to do.
All right. So, we just want to remind you guys that if you have some questions, of course, if you're listening to us live, just jump in the chat room and let us know what you got, and we'll get to those. We can answer them, throughout the show. You don't have to wait until our question segment, of course, but we will collect some questions that people send us on Twitter or any other of the, various social media platforms or email or whatever is good for you. But we like to answer those questions. So we'll jump in with the chat room question first. How about that? We've got Troy asking us, Burrow at Vegas or Hurts versus New Orleans when we get to the questions. We're there. So we've got Joe Burrow is going to Vegas. Jalen Hurts is hosting New Orleans. We've talked about other players on those teams already, and obviously we like Cincinnati's wide receivers a little more than the wide receivers in Philadelphia.
Well, we just talked about 2 receivers that we like from both teams.
Right. We do like them both, and they're both rookies.
But the question is mostly about the quarterback. The rushing ability gives Hurts the edge. I will almost always present, if the 2 guys are too close, who has the higher ceiling and who has the higher floor. But in my current rankings, right, I currently have Hurts as number 8 and Burrow as number 11. Because there are 2 guys between them, I will simply go with Hurts. And what would you do in this situation, Jay?
I would go with the higher floor in this situation. and that's always going to be Hurts at this point because of his rushing ability and the way that he puts up running stats.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely I'm going with Hurts there. I like Joe Burrow a lot, and I've got him on a team, and I want to see him do well, and I've decided to hope that the Bengals win some games this year. But, whenever I root for a team, it doesn't work out for me, so I try not to get too invested.
So audience questions, and these are taken mostly from Twitter. And as Jason said, you're always welcome to email us or tweet us or post on Facebook or wherever you can find us. But I'm just going to launch into a couple and present them to Jason. You can look at my rankings on drink5.com and already see what it is that I would pick based on the analytics that I've done. I'm going to pick some of these a little bit more off the cuff. But I want you to provide your answer first.
Okay.
So from Tim Pizzarelli, should I be starting Mahomes against Dallas or Jones against Atlanta? That's Mac Jones against Atlanta.
I'm sorry. I go with Mahomes here. It feels like Mahomes, where his floor should be, is very close to where Mac Jones' ceiling is. So it's kind of a no-brainer for me anyways. You're starting Mahomes.
So the issue here is that Dallas Cowboys defense has sort of stepped up a little bit. They've been winning games a lot more of a closed book kind of way than they had previously, but certainly their offense has scored a lot of points too, and so you'd expect more of a shootout. This question I may have had a different answer for if it was 2 weeks ago, but after Mahomes' good performance this past week, I agree. It is Patrick Mahomes, and go back to starting him until he proves otherwise.
Yeah, so Dallas is middle of the pack, 16 in fact, when it comes to giving up fantasy points to quarterbacks, but the Falcons are number 3, which is a lot of points.
That's all season.
Right.
So sometimes you got to look at, like, in the past
few weeks.
Yeah.
Dak Prescott, 26. Trevor Siemian, 15.96. If you're giving up 16 points to Trevor Siemian, that's not good. That's not a good sign. That's 25 points to any quarterback with any kind of skill. So the Falcons are definitely a matchup to exploit in certain situations, but not when you have Patrick Mahomes.
Well, we both agree that it's Patrick Mahomes.
Yeah.
From FFB Podcast, shout out to another fantasy football podcast out there. Who are you most unsure about starting this week? And they said we're starting off this discussion with Elijah Moore. And I tend to agree with that. It's an interesting thing when Elijah Moore scores one touchdown with one quarterback and then another touchdown with another quarterback, and this is the game that was 2 weeks ago, clearly showing that he has the ability to do all sorts of things on the field. But that doesn't necessarily translate to every week performance, especially when there's no consistency in who's starting. I have Elijah Moore currently as the number 40 wide receiver, which makes total sense why they would put him in a position in their minds that they're unsure about, because he's basically a borderline flex that has a huge amount of upside but could score 2.
Yep. So let's take your Drink 5 team, for example. Is there anyone on that team that you're unsure about starting this week? Because I know who on my team I am most unsure about, and that's going to be Cam Newton. So I have Kyler Murray in this league. Kyler Murray has not been playing the last few weeks. Finding a replacement for him has not been fun. My choice for this week is Cam Newton. So I'm obviously a bit unsure about that, considering that he hasn't quite played. And if he's not labeled the starter in the game, I don't think I'll be playing him. I'll have to swap him out, but I'll have to be paying close attention because here in Flea Flicker, we have that rule where if you pick up a player and you want to drop him that week, you have to do that no later than 24 hours before the player's game starts. So if he's announced as the starter on like Friday, that's best case scenario. If he's announced, if it's announced that it'll be a game time decision, then I may need to have some sort of backup plan waiting on the bench.
Ooh, a backup plan.
A backup plan for Cam Newton.
That's fun. So I have a player in Drink 5. This particular league is half PPR, and I'm doing really well. I'm 9-1. So I've been.
I'm nearly the opposite. I'm 2-8.
I've been almost uncontested in this particular league. I have a lot of great players, but I do have one guy who's my WR3 filling in for Cooper Kupp, who's going to be on bye this week. Is currently Jarvis Landry. Now Jarvis Landry, because of OBJ's departure, could jump up into a great PPR option, but last week he didn't, And so the question is that going to change, or is Baker Mayfield and his wide receiving options just not they're not available any longer in his repertoire? It's not something that the offense is looking at. Because it should be
but they should be.
It should be that Jarvis Landry gets 7 passes a game.
Right.
There's no reason why that shouldn't be the case. Now, that said, Elijah Moore is on the waiver wire, and I right now would either play Jarvis Landry or I would play Chase Claypool if he was able to play this particular week, or I would pick up like an Elijah Moore or like a Kendrick Bourne from the waiver. So I am in a very similar position to the podcast, but I have Landry ranked 31 in anticipation of him doing better than he has. And so I'm still sticking with him at this moment.
Okay.
But it's a tough one.
I like that open-ended question.
Man the Mix says, key Week 11 matchup with playoff implications are at stake. Who do I start at my second running back position? Ramandra Stevenson, who we talked about earlier. Damian Harris, who's obviously returning from injury from the same team. Or Miles Sanders, who's also returning from injury and could end up being the starter again with the Eagles. So Stevenson, Harris, or Sanders? And what would you go with, Jason?
My choice is going to be Ramandra Stevenson. So Damian Harris, like we said, returning from concussion, not 100% sure on him, but it looks like he'll probably play. However, he isn't a huge participant in the passing game on the Patriots. That's Ramandra Stevenson. Stevenson also carries the ball, so he could be certainly the guy that gets a lot more touches in this game. Miles Sanders is going to be on IR probably until Saturday when they have to make a decision to activate him or not. I believe Saturday at 4 p.m. Eastern or something like that is the deadline that if you're going to play on Sunday, you have to be activated off the IR by that point. So you're not going to know if Miles Sanders is even playing until after Ramandra Stevenson and Damian Harris play. So you got to pick between Stevenson and Harris, in my opinion.
I don't have Sanders ranked yet, and I would pick Ramandre as well, right?
And I would just go with Stevenson in that case. So that's sort of a procedural answer. I get, if they're all playing at the exact same time, maybe you would consider Miles Sanders, but in this case, I just can't consider Miles Sanders if those are your only options because you need the points. And Stevenson has a decently high ceiling and has been very efficient lately.
All right, so, Salt City Slim says Hunter Renfro or Adam Thielen. This is in a PPR league. So Renfro or Thielen, which sounds like a crazy question.
It does.
Because Adam Thielen has traditionally been the guy over there in Minnesota, but now they have Justin Jefferson, who is ranked much higher, taking away a lot of those targets. So if I look well, even before I look at my rankings, I know it's going to say Adam Thielen. I just said earlier in the podcast that I do have a league, for example, where I'm playing Hunter Renfro, and I like that too. He's another guy who is getting a ton of targets. But who would you favor for this particular week?
I want to see how Green Bay is doing against the wide receivers. I lean Adam Thielen, but of course the numbers are telling you that Hunter Renfro has actually been better over the last few weeks.
There you go. That's why he's asking the question.
2 games in a row with 9 targets. Who are the Raiders playing again?
Raiders are playing against Cincinnati versus Cincinnati, so they're at home.
Okay, so Green Bay is giving up the 5th fewest points to opposing wide receivers versus Cincinnati, who is right at the middle at 16. So that's a better matchup with Cincinnati than with Green Bay and
I know that's why it's not that far of a question. But in PPR rankings specifically, for example, I have Adam Thielen at number 21 and Hunter Renfro at 24. Again, with 2 guys between them, I'm going to select Adam Thielen as the guy with the more stars in what I would consider to be his player rating. Certainly has more of a historical background in scoring fantasy points than Hunter Renfro does.
Yeah.
But Renfro has been playing a little better as of late and has a matchup that is arguably better. So what would you do?
I would go with Renfro. It's a PPR league. Renfro's had 9 targets each of the last 2 weeks.
I love that.
Yeah, so give me the guy who's getting more opportunities. It's not a lot more opportunities, and they're very close, as you said. I'm going to lean Renfro here.
Here's another one. We're talking about Adam Thielen. Do you start Adam Thielen or Tyler Lockett? And we'll continue that within the PPR just because he didn't specify. I personally am not sure what I would do there. I think I would go with Tyler Lockett. Have him ranked 16 over Adam Thielen's 21. The problem there mostly being Russell Wilson's inability to be a good quarterback when he came back from injury.
Yeah, I mean, getting shut out is not what you expected to see from Russell Wilson because I think it was the first time in 60-something or 160 games that Russell Wilson had been shut out in a game. And it was the first time in his whole career that he didn't start was the last couple of weeks. And he comes back and he has like one of his worst, his team has one of the worst performances that he could have. So
yeah,
I totally trust Seattle to sort of, figure that out. But for the time being, I would wait on that, I think I'm waiting to see what happens with Seattle. So, yeah, I would not play Lockett this week.
Okay, and of course, rankings change as new information is revealed, period, to me.
As new things come to light.
Does it make sense to fade Kyle Pitts this week? Asks King Palm 3. New England is usually pretty good at shutting down a team's top option, so they'll likely go for Kyle Pitts and let them continue to try to funnel the offense through Cordial Patterson.
So
I agree with what he's saying as Belichick's strategy.
Well, Cordial Patterson's not going to be playing, I don't think.
I don't know that he's been ruled out, has he? I think he just it was noted that he had some kind of an injury. Why don't you research that?
I'm looking right now at Cordial Patterson. If Cordial Patterson does play, I think that's the player that they would sort of try to stop because that's who Belichick knows. And if anything, Belichick wouldn't want the guy who he couldn't figure out how to make work against him.
Well, Pitts only has 18 points in his last 3 games, and a lot of that is because, just like with Darren Waller, teams are scheming to take Pitts away, and that's why he's bringing up the question in the first place. In a tough matchup against the Patriots, who are 8th against fantasy tight ends over the last 5 weeks, I think that maybe they'll try to take both away if they can, right?
Yeah.
So basically, this means New England will win 26-0.
28-3.
Is that what you're predicting?
Well, that's the New England and Falcons thing.
It's the Belichick way.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just to rub dirt in their face.
So I would say, yes, fade Kyle Pitts because fade Atlanta because they're playing New England.
That's why you fade him.
And if you can if you have the ability to have a tight end either on your bench or on the wire who's maybe a top 15 tight end still that has upside, he might score more points than Kyle Pitts this particular week.
Yeah, so Cordial Patterson is going to be a game-time decision for this one. It is Thursday night, so if that's a player you wanted to start or whatever, you get to wait all the way up until game time. And then New England is giving the third fewest points to opposing tight ends. So I have no problem with fading Pitts, especially if Patterson doesn't play.
All right, the Husbus says, I have Ingram, Gaskin, Harris, and Foreman, and I have to sit one of those. So you're going to play Najee Harris no matter what.
Yeah.
And Mark Ingram is a great fill-in with Alvin Kamara gone.
Miles Gaskin
so the
is
question,
every other week kind of guy, as you mentioned.
Is this the week?
This is an on week, and they play the Jets, who are giving up tons of points to opposing running backs. It all lines up for him.
So the question is, do you play Gaskin or Foreman? And I have Foreman ranked as 25 and Gaskin ranked as 23, which means that if only one is between them, that's not enough for me to say just this guy. It depends on their ceilings and floors.
Yeah. So the Titans, who do the Titans play? Do we have that written down anywhere clearly?
The Titans are playing against Chicago. They're at Chicago.
No, the Ravens or the Ravens are playing Chicago this week. Let me check the schedule here.
Oh, I'm sorry. Versus Houston. They're at home.
Oh, I mean, that's got to be an easy
I was looking
matchup.
at Devonta, not Deonte. Deonta and Devonta.
Okay.
That's close.
Yes, it's very close.
So, yeah, they're playing Houston.
So, Houston's giving up the 10th most points to opposing running backs.
Sure, but there's 3 running backs on that team that are
But
cycling.
he hasn't been established as the main guy there yet,
right.
Even though he looked a bit like King Henry. We were calling him Eric Henry when we were watching the games on Sunday morning. So,
yeah.
Sunday afternoon. We're in the Eastern time zone. They don't even start till 1 o'clock. Seems ridiculous. So, yeah, that's I don't. I guess you're sitting
Foreman. So, yeah.
You got me all confused. I'm blaming this one on you.
I agree with what you're saying in that Gaskin's an every other week guy, that Foreman is new, that he hasn't developed his specific job as the number one guy, even if he does. Some people think he will. I picked him up in a couple leagues thinking that he might. But he doesn't have it right now. There's three guys, and that makes it difficult to get a lot of fantasy points in one go. So we're going to say that you are going to sit Foreman for this one and hope that he does get the job so that you can play him going forward. Boucher Designs says this fantasy football season just feels like one big who the fuck did I just pick up? And yeah, that's every season. But there have been a lot of players this season that I can certainly relate to what you're saying, because they're like third string guys or fourth string guys or undrafted free agents or players that you may not have heard of. I think Jason and I have probably heard of most of these guys from the get-go just because we're so attached to the fantasy football season. But there have been a lot of those UDFAs and like kind of off-the-street guys this year.
Yeah, to answer your question, who the fuck did you just pick up? You probably picked up Deonta Foreman because he's the most added player on Yahoo this week. Or you picked up maybe Ramandra Stevenson if he was still available. If you got Stevenson, big thumbs up. I like that move. If you've got Foreman, you're kind of holding on to him for the future. You know, in the next couple weeks, if he can establish himself as the main guy there, that's awesome. Because, you know, you look at Adrian Peterson, he has like 21 yards in each game.
And everyone feels that way that you do when the injury bug hits the season, which happens in the middle of the season between like weeks 5 and 12.
Right. You look at a completely unrecognizable team on Wednesday morning and you go, am I taking crazy pills? What the fuck did I do to my team?
That's right. Jay Cheesehead says, do you start A.J. Dillon or James Conner as the RB2 on your team?
Well, I think we know where the Cheesehead is going to lean.
Well, again, so I have Dillon at 8 and Conner at 11. Dillon is great just because we know he can already field the load. Green Bay is going to give him some work, and Aaron Jones is not going to come back in any capacity because he sprained his MCL. So it's not like he's a guy waiting in the wings. They're clearly going to give A.J. Dillon the starting position. The problem with Conner is that Conner has been great, but we're unsure if that will continue if Kyler Murray is back at quarterback and if Hopkins is back at wide receiver.
He seems to be still very touchdown dependent, even though he's scoring a shitload of touchdowns. I guess if that makes any sense.
Well, I love Conner, and he's always been their goal line guy, regardless of how many touches he's gotten. Chase Edmonds has never been that guy. And I picked up Benjamin in a couple of these thinking that perhaps he would spell him a little bit, but he didn't really get much work at all. So it sounds like Conner is just the guy if there's no Edmonds. And if Edmonds is there, then he's going to get the majority of the work, but not any of the goal line work. So that means Conner is an RB1 now for an Arizona team that is arguably the best team in football. So it's difficult to not start a guy who is the running back, the goal line running back for the Arizona Cardinals offense.
They're definitely one of the best teams in the NFL. They have Colt McCoy probably starting another week. Kyler Murray was at practice this week, but they have a bye coming up in week 12. They could very well hold him out against a very weak Seattle team this year.
But my point is that that Conner seems to be doing better if you just look at the numbers when Kyler's not playing.
That's my point, is saying what I'm trying to get at here is that if you have James Conner, then you probably want to start him in your lineup anyways, even if we like A.J. Dillon more. Like, if you've got A.J. Dillon and James Conner, start them both. Well, if you have an even better running back, then that's a wonderful problem to have.
We must assume he has Eckler or Taylor or like Harris.
And that's totally reasonable when you look at who to pair with. These two, anybody could be paired with these two guys.
Yeah, so I think what we're saying is
high upside for both of these starts. A.J. Dillon just has a more competent quarterback to help him out.
Yeah, so it's difficult. Either way you go, it's probably a coin flip. But I have A.J. Dillon in my rankings currently. Garrett BFF says Hunter Henry has 11 targets for 7 catches in the red zone this year, and all 7 catches are touchdowns. that's just awesome info to be relaying. Thinking about earlier in the season when almost everybody thought Jonnu Smith was going to be the guy there and Hunter Henry was kind of an afterthought. I was hoping it was the other way because I have Hunter Henry in a dynasty, and I always loved his pass catching ability. He seemed like he was a very clutch guy on the offense for the Chargers.
Yeah.
And it turns out that's exactly how Belichick views him. And that's awesome as a guy who's just catching passes in the red zone every game.
Right, and that's, you've described it perfectly. He's getting touchdowns. All of his touchdowns have come since week 4. So that's for 7 games in a row. 6 of those games he's scored. One of those games he doubled it up. He's not getting huge yardage totals. He has a 75-yard game, and other than that, his highest total is only 42. So he needs to score the touchdown to be fantasy relevant, but it doesn't seem like it's going to stop anytime soon either. Kind of like James Conner. He needs the touchdown to really have his value, but he keeps scoring touchdowns, so the value seems to be there.
Yeah.
It's not like you can 100% count on the touchdown, but, it's more likely than not that he'll score a touchdown.
Yep. So we got the last question is from iPad Illafit. Who do I pick up this week? I've got D. Harris, J. Agnew, or B. Edwards as my options, and that's for a flex position. So you have...
I like Edwards and Agnew. I started Agnew last week, in fact, in a league. Brian Edwards was the best guy on the Raiders last week, but they put up all their points in the first half and then didn't show up for the second half. And then I assume that's Deonte Harris, the Saints wide receiver, who is playing well, but he's got Trevor Siemian as his quarterback. Kind of like Jamal Agnew in this spot. Where do you have these guys ranked, Dave? Are you looking that up?
Yeah, so Harris is currently 48, and Agnew is 50, and Edwards is 52. So all these questions.
Oh, so close.
There's a reason why everyone has questions because they are in a pickle, and I think personally that Harris may be in the best spot to start, but I think that Brian Edwards is the most talented athlete of the group. It's a tough one for me. I'm just going to go with what my rankings currently say, which is Deonte Harris. When you look at the reasons why he's even on the list, it's because he's had in the past 3 games 7, 8, and 4 targets, and that's what we like to see. A lot of targets for those particular players. That's 35, 52, and 84 yards, and actually some rushes in there as well. So he hasn't been scoring a whole lot of fantasy points, but he has a lot of targets. When we look at Agnew from Jacksonville, he scored targets. He had 12 in week 8 and then 5 in week 9 and 10. So that was kind of like a peak for him against Seattle, and then it came back down to 5 and 5. The problem that I have with Agnew is that his receptions have trended down from 6 to 3 to 0. And the reason,
not a good trend.
The reason why he scored points last week, and you're, I'm sure, happy about, is because they were using him as a running back, and he got a touchdown as a rusher.
Hey, it's like you said earlier. However they score the points, doesn't matter.
79 yards and a touchdown and 3 carries.
That's funny. I didn't even realize it was carries.
You didn't see the game. You're just like, he scored me 8 points. It's fine.
There was a wedding on Sunday. I saw what I saw. And I was in the mountains. I was going to enjoy the mountains. I wasn't. I can watch football every week. I can only enjoy mountains when I'm on vacation.
Sure. So there's those two. And then Edwards gets 4 targets a game every game. He's very consistent. Last week, he had 3 receptions for 88 yards and a touchdown. But that's the highest amount he's scored the entire year.
Yeah.
So we have to look at that as we talked about this when Ruggs was first put up on charges, and it was discovered that he, had crashed his car under the influence. It was like, well, Edwards could take over, but he's not taking over Ruggs' position. They would have to make it special for Edwards.
Right.
And Renfro is the guy that really is seeing a little bit of a boost, I think. So because of all of that, I would play the guy with the highest floor, and that seems to me, or most consistent floor, and that seems to me to be the Saint. However, I know you were talking earlier about not liking the Saints or not thinking that they were very consistent with their current quarterback play. Jamal Agnew seems like a crazy, chaotic play. And Edwards seems like a guy that could certainly score you a lot of points, but will most likely give you 4 for 36 yards. So, who's your play?
I still think I would probably stick with Agnew here.
All right. So Agnew for flex. I will vote for Jason's guy. I got 1 vote in for Agnew. And then we got to get to the Jay Cut list to close out the show.
Yeah, so guys who are owned in lots of leagues who we think don't need to be polluting your bench. You need to pick up guys with better upside, guys with a brighter future. Cut the guys who are not helping you anymore.
All right, well, let's just do it lightning style, yeah?
Okay, at the quarterback position, you got Matt Ryan owned in 83% of Flea Flicker leagues. All the ownership stats that we give you are going to be based on the Flea Flicker platform. So if you're unfamiliar with it, you should check it out. It's a very fantasy-focused platform with a nice to use UI, and they're very responsive to customer support. I'm a big fan of them. We've been using them for 10 years now for our Dynasty League. So that's good stuff. Moving on, Carson Wentz, 77% owned. He had a really bad game last week. He's got a tough matchup against Buffalo coming up, and then a bye week in the near future. So I don't think that keeping Carson Wentz around is going to benefit your team. Teddy Bridgewater, 56%. He has a bye this week. He's struggled the last few weeks. Again, there's better options out there. Ryan Tannehill, I believe you added him to the list, right?
Yes.
Okay. What? Give me 30 seconds on Ryan Tannehill.
Are you upset that he's on the list?
I mean, you got to keep someone.
For the last 2 games, he's had only 19 completions. His completion percentage has been high, but he simply hasn't been passing the ball a lot. His yardage has been 143 and 213 over those 2 games. And he's only had 1 touchdown in each with an interception in one of those games.
Okay.
And his rushing, which used to be earlier in the season, more of an average of like 30, 35 yards per game. For the last 2 games, he's had an average of 2 yards rushing. And he has gotten touchdowns on those. But what that tells me is that he's not scrambling in the regular game script. Those were just probably QB sneaks at the goal line.
Yeah, right at the goal line.
And so those are not the things that should be expected. Therefore, his fantasy point totals of 15 and 19 from the last 2 weeks are actually inflated artificially by his QB sneak numbers. He should actually be worse than he currently is right now. And I think it has a lot to do with that team struggling to find a way to figure out what to do without Derrick Henry, because they are 50% Derrick Henry.
Yes, that is a good way of putting it. They're half Henry and half the rest of the team.
Now, their next game is against Houston, and they could certainly shape back up, but then they play against New England and have a bye. So if you're in a 1-quarterback league, not a quarterback to roster right now.
It's just disappointing to see him, because I have a team with both Matt Ryan and Ryan Tannehill on it right now. It's a dynasty team, so I'm not eager to get rid of them. And there's not a lot of stuff to pick up.
There could be someone who's at the same level that like has some better things.
We've got Trevor Lawrence this week.
Yeah, I don't know.
And then in Superflex leagues, those are leagues where you're starting 2 quarterbacks, or you have the option to at least. Mike White and Taysom Hill, both of them can be cut. They were kind of hot pickups for a minute there, but it doesn't look like it's going to work out for them.
Well, Taysom, if he was a starter, obviously has done really well last year, but it doesn't seem like that's going to happen.
Seems like they're riding with Trevor Siemian. And regardless of how much they're going to pay Taysom Hill, they seem reluctant to start him at quarterback.
Yeah, they're reluctantly crouched at the starting line.
Yes, their engines are pumping and jumping in time. I don't remember. I need the beat behind me to sing along. So anyways, at running back, you got Adrian Peterson, who is 57% owned. Jeremy McNichols, 44% owned. Those guys go together because they're on Tennessee, and we both like Deonta Foreman.
Well, it's not even about liking him. He looked better as a replacement for Derrick Henry.
Right.
And
we like him more than these 2.
I'm pretty sure what will happen, no matter who wants anything to happen, is that we're going to have this trio of running backs.
It's true. And so maybe you shouldn't own any of them.
And that always sucks.
But at least Foreman has some promise going forward, some unknown potential maybe yet to be tapped.
Yeah, so Peterson early down work, McNichols is getting a lot of passes, and Deontay Foreman looks like the big body that they want to try to replace our guy with. But unfortunately for them, Derrick Henry is all three of those guys turned into one.
Yes, and then he has no foot at the moment.
That's not going to work out.
Yeah. So Jamal Williams owned in 68% of leagues. I think he sat out last week. He'll probably be back, but they like they like Swift so damn much in that team.
Jamal Williams is awesome, and he's just such a great guy to have on that team for the team.
Yeah. For fantasy football. Not as much,
but it's not enough touches to mean anything.
Nahim Heinz, 67%, kind of the same case there. They love Taylor so much. His good game was inflated by broken plays, by bad defense. So you don't need Heinz on your team. Ronald Jones owned in 58% of leagues. Still, that is 58% of leagues where people aren't paying attention because Ronald Jones should have been dropped weeks ago. And Devonte Booker, we talked about him earlier. His sort of last remaining value is this week, but they play Tampa Bay. There's probably no reason to start him this week, so you can just go ahead and get rid of him, in my opinion. I agree with you there, Dave. At wide receiver, Allen Robinson is owned in 83% of leagues still. We've talked about him on the drop cut list a few times, but since he's owned in 83% of leagues, I think that you're going to need a reminder. Jarvis Landry is owned in 81% of leagues. I don't like Jarvis Landry anymore for the Browns. Dave, you were kind of talking positively about him earlier. Do you agree or disagree with that cut?
No, there's a reason why he should be on the cut list. But like I described earlier, in situations in which you're like doing bye-week fill-in on a 3 wide receiver team, and he's the last guy that you're putting in there, like he's currently a pick up and play option. Which means that he's a guy that exists between like 32 and 42 on the rankings.
Yeah, I mean his only double-digit point game this year, came because he had a rushing touchdown in week 1.
We've discussed him at length anyway.
Yeah.
So it is not necessarily a guy to drop, but the reason why he's on the cut list is because he hasn't done anything. So if you haven't done anything for me lately, then what good are you?
Right. I don't expect him to completely turn it around at this point. Russell Gage owned in 45% of leagues. He is not really the go-to guy. It seems like Olamide Zacchaeus, right? I just know that
Zacchaeus?
It seemed to be pronounced in the way that I thought was wrong, but I heard more than one announcer pronounce it that way. So we'll just have to listen for it again on Thursday night, see what Joe Buck thinks of the pronunciation.
Yeah, let's check out what Joe Buck thinks.
T.Y. Hilton owned in 54% of the leagues. He's not doing anything. He had one long catch this year.
Michael Pittman
probably accounts for half of his yardage.
Is now the wide receiver 1 in the Colts.
Marvin Jones Jr. has been sort of relegated to third or fourth target now on that team. Owned in 82% of leagues still. So, these guys who are owning a lot of leagues, perhaps you can dangle them in trades and see if people are still interested in salvaging those players. But personally, I don't see the need to keep them around if that's not the case, if you can't get anything out of them.
Yeah.
And Brandon Nyuk, 77% of leagues, in a week where the San Francisco offense played very well. He still only got 3 catches for like 23 yards. So Ayuk is going to be a guy who flashes occasionally with a touchdown, but Deebo Samuel and George Kittle and whoever is in at running back, generally Elijah Mitchell right now, is the focus of that offense, and Ayuk is a distant 4th option there.
That's correct. I mean,
worthy of 77% ownership.
He did have 15.7 points the previous week, which is why a lot of people picked him up and acquired him from the wire.
Fair enough.
He had 7 targets in week 8, 8 targets in week 9, and 4 targets in week 10. So what I'm looking for before dropping Ayuk is if his targets drop again and his fantasy performance drops again. If he's able to actually pick that up, I would say he's more of a hot seat player. I still think that he has every other week value, possibly, that kind of a wide receiver. So I would back off a bit and say he's a hot seat guy and not a immediate drop.
See what he can do against Jacksonville.
Yeah, exactly.
So the Jaguars giving up the 10th most points to opposing wide receivers. So it's certainly within the realm of possibility that he picks it up and has a decent game. Personally, I just don't see it, but that's just one man's opinion. Kenny Golladay, 73% owned in leagues. The chaos going on for the New York Giants wide receiver position is nothing you want to mess with if it's a kind of blah guy like Golladay. You know, you could sort of go with Shepard because he's a PPR monster. You go with Tony because he has huge, big game potential. Looks like he could really be a good wide receiver when healthy. I think you avoid Slayton altogether now, and Kenny Golladay I haven't liked at any point this season for the most part.
The only consistent receiver on the Giants is Sterling Shepard.
Right, but he's not even consistently healthy.
Well, the health has nothing to do with it, right? You have to take health out of the fantasy equation.
Okay.
But like one of the next guys we're going to talk about is Cadarius Tony, right?
Yeah, I mean it's more of a function of the Giants' offense is just not worth, keeping these guys around.
Well, I'm just saying that Cadarius Tony looks like a bell curve. His targets were 2, 3, 9, 13, 3, 5, 1. And the points in the last two games were 3.4 and 0.7 in standard leagues.
Yeah, and in the last game he played, he got injured early in the game.
He's a future wide receiver for this team. He is not someone who's going to contribute tons of fantasy production for fantasy teams in the next couple of games.
So I would have him as a hot seat guy instead. Go. That's all.
Well, it's Brandon Ayuk and Kadarius Toney in the battle to see which one gets cut first.
And who's going to win that battle? Cole Beasley. We talked about Cole Beasley earlier, how you like him. It's the biggest discrepancy of the week in the ECR category where you're minus 15 on Cole Beasley. That is certainly enough for me to say, yep, go ahead and cut him.
All right. Cut the bees.
And then we at tight end, we've got Zach Ertz owned in 75% of leagues. Now, this is weird because I was looking at tight ends a little while ago, and Zach Ertz actually looked like a player I might pick up.
This is a Kyler Murray and like an offensive scheme thing.
Right. He had one decent game since he's got to the Cardinals, and that was the very first game. A lot of times we see people flash a little bit when they first get somewhere, and then they get in the routine, or teams finally have a little bit of tape on them, and they can't do it anymore.
Well, they acquired Zach Ertz to use him just like they were using Max Williams before that. And I think the thing that really is concerning is that if you're a tight end that drops to the area of tight ends where you can be found in the waiver wire every other week, which is basically 11 to 15, and that is Dan Arnold and CJ Uzoma and Tyler Conklin and Cole Kmet and Evan Engram. Those guys are, back and forth all the time on the waiver wire. And what that means is that if you are not to keep Zach Ertz and you cut him and he has a good game, you'll never get him back ever again.
Yeah.
But if he has a bad game and doesn't do well for the rest of the season, maybe there's a guy that you could have gotten off of the wire that is going to do well. It's just he's that back nexus of tight ends.
And then the last guy on our cut list is Jared Cook. He is owned in 72% of fantasy leagues on Flea Flicker. Just one catch this week, 2 catches a couple of weeks ago. He had a couple of good games in there, weeks 4 and 6. There's not been a lot going on for him. They play Pittsburgh and Denver, tough defenses to play against right now. So I definitely don't like Jared Cook as one of the options.
Yeah, he has to score a touchdown to matter, and he's only had 1.
Yes, that's well put. No, he has 2. The only 2 weeks that he's mattered, he has 2 touchdowns. Okay, so again, thank you everybody for listening to us. We are going to be live next Tuesday because of the holiday. We're going to go a little early next week. So we'll be on again at 9 o'clock, and we'll tweet out the information and stuff about the show. We do that every week, so make sure you follow us on Twitter. Subscribe to us on YouTube just to cut out all the middlemen if you don't like them. That way, whenever we schedule a broadcast on YouTube, you're going to be the first one to know. So thanks for listening. Check us out. on our website. Check us out on on social media, and review us, subscribe to us, all those good things that you always hear at the end of podcasts. I'm just filling in the blank there. I was waiting for you to play the music. I don't know what the problem was there.
Happy Wednesday, Jason.
Yes, it's been a long, long week.
And everybody drink 5 out there, and
Cheers,
good luck in their matchups, and we'll see you next week.